Okay, welcome everyone to the Data Resilience SpectrumCast. Thank you. And as always, I'm your host, Steve Keniston, joined by Randy Arsenal. Hey, Randy.
Hey, what's up, Steve?
And our subject matter expert, Sean Sperry. Hey, Sean, how are you doing?
Good morning or
And our
afternoon,
good
depending on
friend,
when you're watching this.
say that again?
I said it depends on when you're watching this, whether it's morning or afternoon.
Did I say morning? Oh,
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And our good friend Trisha, our other subject matter expert, is actually not having a fun time right now. She's at the dentist. So
She decided that going to the
that was
dentist was better
preferable to
than.
doing this. Yeah.
I don't know why you'd pick that over this, but anyway, maybe she'll join us halfway through. We'll get a surprise and she'll pop in. Um, this whole Spectrum Cast is all about protecting applications, and a lot of our customers are on their journey to cloud, as we like to say. And as a part of that, they're leveraging SaaS applications or developing applications that are born in the cloud, behaving as SaaS workloads. And of course, the assumption is not only do they drive the data, they need to be backed up or protected. And we're seeing a lot of solutions in the marketplace that actually do SaaS application data protection. And one of the big things we're going to be announcing here at IBM in the next week or so is SaaS application workload protection, and specifically workload protection for Microsoft Office 365, which is probably one of those biggest SaaS applications out there. Wouldn't you agree, Randy?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and not coincidentally now being used by IBM. So it's we're a big customer as well. So yeah, if it's not the biggest, it's certainly in the top 10, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I have data that says it's growing at a clip rate of 24% almost. So it's growing pretty substantially, and we're going to see a lot of folks taking advantage of this. So, Sean, maybe you can express to me, what have you seen in the way? I mean, this migration or this journey to the cloud isn't anything new. What have you seen with regard to folks protecting applications that are either born in the cloud or specific SaaS applications like Salesforce or that sort of thing?
Well, I think in my mind, and in other people's minds, there's this big question that you have to answer, and is, if Microsoft is running this for me, why do I need to protect it, right? Isn't that what I'm paying them to do, right? And I think it's been an evolving journey to kind of understand what are the cloud providers' responsibilities and what are my responsibilities that can cause me to have to restore data and get the data back, right? And that's what I've kind of seen, this evolving understanding about why people need data protection for a cloud-based software as a service application.
And when we talk to clients and also do a little bit of research, we see that Microsoft specifically comes out and tells clients utilizing the Microsoft 365 solution set to make sure that they are backing up their particular workloads, right? So they're not doing the backups.
Yeah, I think there are some maybe misguided assumptions made about how secure or safe or impenetrable the data is if it's in a SaaS platform, and those are, I think we're finding, if you look at the news over the past couple of years, those assumptions are not necessarily based in fact. So we always talk about layers of protection, and these environments are no different. You got to apply layers of protection to ensure that you don't have a downtime or you don't have any kind of a disruptive event.
Steve, you have a really good slide and a really good deck and one of the slides in there that I really like is this one that lays out your responsibilities for Microsoft 365 data resilience. It looks like it's put up by Forrester. And on the left-hand side, there's a table that says Microsoft protection. And on the right-hand side, there's a table that says customer responsibility. I don't know, can you, and I guess if you look at the left-hand side, what it boils down to is Microsoft is responsible for the service. So if the service, they are guaranteeing and providing that the service is not going to go down due to hardware or infrastructure failure, right? But a lot of these other things that can occur to your data or can happen to your data or require you to do a restore, they're not necessarily protecting against. Like, for instance, data being deleted by an administrator because an employee left, right, and needed long-term in the future, or ransomware attacking the edge or the endpoints of the system, and that causing that information to be replicated back to your Office or Microsoft 365 instance, so to speak.
Yeah, you're laying out some interesting things, right? Microsoft will come out and they will tell you, and Randy, you have some familiarity with this, obviously, with Spectrum Scale, the what do they call it? The distributed, the dispersal.
Dispersal algorithm.
The dispersal algorithm, right? So Microsoft, and I don't believe they use Spectrum Scale, but they have things like a dispersal algorithm in their file system to make sure that when, Sean, as you said, when system issues happen, right, they can recover, or they get the data, or your data doesn't disappear just because this particular server went away, right?
Yeah,
but the other
there's some native data protection built into the data layer. Yep.
Right. But like you said, Sean, there are other situations that come up. For example, and this is specific to Microsoft, let's just say, right, that if a user deletes a file, it goes into the deleted items folder. And that folder is around for a few days, but once that folder is cleaned out, you can no longer get that piece of data back. You have to go back to a backup application, if you had one, to be able to get it back. So there are a number of things you mentioned. You mentioned ransomware. You mentioned other natural disaster type things that might happen. Randy, I see you've got some information.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. You know, and it basically just kind of builds off what Sean was saying earlier. These environments are not immune to human error, either malicious or unintentional. You know, they're certainly not immune to attacks, either systemic attacks, organized attacks, you know, ransomware attacks, all the things that your on-prem infrastructure is subject to. You know, these are no exceptions. So it is still critically important. And again, I'll, you know, just go back to what I said earlier. I think it's easy to assume that because you're, you know, using this platform and this cloud-based solution that has its own built-in, you know, it has its own native level of data protection, whether it's erasure coding or multi-zone or, you know, whatever methodology is being used. That is, you know, it's good. It's better than nothing, but it's not comprehensive, and it shouldn't be thought of as such, right? So you got to make sure that regardless of the environment, you want to take responsibility for it and not, you know, abrogate that responsibility to your cloud provider.
I think it's important. It's more than good. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not all of the things you're protecting against when you're doing data protection, right? There's a subset of other things that data protection protects you against that just going to a cloud provider doesn't necessarily protect you against.
Sean, what might be some things to consider as you're sitting down thinking about architecting a solution for your SaaS application workload? The first thing is, well, you thought your service provider did it. They don't. So now you have to do it. What are some things to consider?
Well, I mean, that's another interesting discussion too, right? Because in looking at this new offering that we have, my perception is the complexity of this is nowhere near that of an in-house data protection solution like a Spectrum Protect, right? Meaning the service for protecting Microsoft 365 that we're going to be offering is a tenant on Azure, right? So a lot of the architecture and work and setting up all of that infrastructure to do that is already done for you, right?
Yeah, and that's actually a really, really good point, right? So for a lot of as-a-service services or an as-a-service solutions, the back end is taken care of for you. So for example, if a customer wants to buy Spectrum Protect Plus online services specific for Microsoft 365, they sign up for the service, but that entire service, the back end of that service, is managed by IBM, right? And it's very simple, right? You ask your salesperson or you tell your salesperson, this is how many seats of Microsoft I have. And that's literally how you buy the backup application. It's not tricky. It's not based off capacity. It's none of that. This follows the exact same sales process as it would be if you were buying the application in and of itself. So there's a simplicity there. There's a simplicity in the management component, which really helps to reduce the operational expense because that work is going to be taken on by IBM, right? But what other things should be considered? I mean, we talk a lot about this on the show about recovery time objectives, what to do around malware, that sort of thing. Are there other things that need to be considered?
Your SLAs, how long you're going to keep the data, right? That would be one of the considerations. Are you going to store the data on site or get it out of the cloud provider, right? That might be another consideration. And certain people might have policies that say, listen, we just cannot entrust all of our data to a Microsoft, or in this case, Microsoft or an AWS, right? We have to have a copy of that data on site. So those are some of the other considerations you'd have to take into.
Randy, any thoughts there?
I think retention policy is an important one. There's obviously going to be, risk and compliance decisions that have to be made if there are legal requirements or sort of compliance requirements for retention of records or whatever the case may be, or for, potential future discovery. So there's lots of, the good news is I think, many of the providers, and Microsoft is no exception, are pretty good about, having pro forma templates and standards to help support your environment or help deploy your environment in a way that is compliant with whatever, local and authorities require of your business. That doesn't mean, though, again, just to reiterate, that you should avoid or not consider extended data protection and data sovereignty kind of considerations. You always want to do that, but I would say leverage those cloud provider best practices and pro forma templates where you can, and make sure they're sufficient and adequate for what you need. If they aren't, then augment them accordingly and make sure that you're protecting yourself above and beyond what those baseline requirements are. But yeah, I mean, there is no one answer for everything. So
it's one of the interesting things I found about this offering, our new offering from Microsoft 365, is you can choose the storage in Azure where you're going to store these backups, right? One option is to have IBM totally and completely manage the storage for you on IBM's Azure Blob storage.
Mhm.
Or option two is to manage the storage yourself, even though it's running at Azure using their Blob storage. And I could see where all kinds of different complexities would come into play when making that decision as to which one of those particular
I think
options.
the big value proposition we tried to leverage there was the fact that some customers have relationships with Microsoft and they have their own blob storage and they get their own best pricing because it's integrated into a lot of things. So we didn't want to force upon customers that you also have to buy storage with it. So you can just buy the service, the backup service, have your own storage, and obviously it's less expensive because you're paying for the storage someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing to consider that we didn't bring up, but Randy, I think you kind of touched on this, right? The regulations that are required when thinking about this. Microsoft 365 is a global application, right? Customers in the United States don't just use it; it's used throughout the world, and some of those regions have needs to not have the data. For example, Canada, data can't leave the borders, right? So one of the things we should point out is, as you're thinking about from an architecture perspective, asking questions about where does the data go. IBM's going to have multiple centers located around the globe so that it can adhere to a lot of these best practices and policies that are required. But good questions to ask about where's my data going and is it protected? And then I like the retention policy stuff, Sean, you mentioned. And then I think the other thing you need to think about is twofold. There's a recoverability aspect, because why do we protect data, right? We got to recover it at some point. Obviously, something's going to happen. So how am I doing that, right? Is my bandwidth between the cloud provider and my on-prem solution, where I might need the data, sufficient enough to be able to pull that down should I need to? Number one. Number two is, how does that process happen, right? Some interesting things that we have done is we have integrated the S3 protocol, for example, into the solution to be able to migrate that data to other S3 platforms, whether it be Amazon's Glacier storage, whether it be what we have coming in the near future is the ability to write it out through S3 to Spectrum Protect. And if you're a tape shop and you have regulations about keeping data on tape, you can then migrate that directly to tape. So some other interesting things that get a little bit more detailed when you get beyond just the, hey, I need that mail back, right? That you might want to consider.
Options. It's funny. It's funny. Everybody, including myself, say we want things easy. And then we start asking for options and saying, well, we can do this and we can't do that. And all of a sudden the easy becomes complex because of those options, right?
Well, I think it's that, and that's where, the guidance and the best practices and the kind of experiential value that we as an experienced vendor in the space can add, right? We kind of understand the environments, we understand the regulatory environment and compliance issues associated with your industry. So we can recommend some best practices and some pro forma models to help make that easier, but also give you the additional flexibility to make it, deeper, stronger, faster recovery time, longer retention policies. So you've got the flexibility to engineer a solution that fits your specific requirements. So I think, we got to strike the balance between making it easy to implement and not requiring a ton of engineering work, while also allowing the flexibility and modularity to kind of develop a solution that fits your specific requirements. And that's where, having done this as long as we have and kind of being in the industry as long as we've been, that gives us an advantage, I think.
So we should point out it's not just Microsoft 365, which obviously has a big part of the business, but it's things like Microsoft Dynamics, Salesforce.com, Google Workspaces. All kinds of things need protection in the cloud, including applications that you build, right, for your environment and your infrastructure. And some of the key things to think about are, as you're developing those applications, a key thing for the developers to think about is, what is my backup process? And is there anything I can do around the application to architect in good connectivity to do backups? And I think that's a key thing to think about in trying to get ahead of what inevitably comes down the line. Sean, as you say, you want it simple, and then all of a sudden you need these options. Well, one of those options is backup, right?
Well, it's one of those like core enterprise data services that you got to have, right? It's not, we talk about table stakes all the time. It's no longer, even for a web-based or a cloud deployed application, you have to have data protection as one of those fundamental, baseline requirements. It's not something you can, exclude. Randy,
I'm curious, in all of our taking the spin on the wheel of misfortune, do we know of, and I don't remember us ever talking about it, but do we know of any online applications that have been hacked or attacked, causing some serious outages?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think. Fairly recently,
Slack. Oh,
yes, there was a Slack issue.
Was out. They were down for 2 hours.
There was a regional Office 365 outage too, a few months back. I don't remember specifically where. I think it was actually in Europe, but one of their regional data centers had an attack or a problem and had to go offline for some period of time. And while technically those Office 365 and they had really, really significant performance degradation because they were having to go, remote and pull data from multiple, distant data centers. So yeah, those are, I would say they're not as frequent or common as kind of on-prem attacks and ransomware issues, but they do occur for sure.
And when they get hit, I mean, it's not just the one company anymore, right?
That's right. Which by the way is why that's what makes them attractive, is that, an attacker can hit a specific asset of some kind and broadly affect many organizations and enterprises and agencies. So it's kind of like more efficient for them, I think.
Great. All right, folks. So hopefully we've helped given you another thing yet to think about within the data center and protecting those as a service applications. And it may be something that you want to do, and is just ask around the environment that you have to see if anybody's stood up any of these applications, and understand what they have for protection built in and what might you need to do above and beyond in order to protect that asset. And kind of obviously, as we always say, you got to balance that within the budget of kind of the needs of the business and is it necessary and that sort of thing. Sean, any final thoughts?
Brave new world.
Brave new
Keeps on
world.
going. Yeah.
Randy?
No, I mean, I think, this is a theme we talk about a lot. You can't take anything for granted. You can't assume that your cloud-based provider, your cloud-based solution is inherently and, natively taking care of all the data protection decisions for you. Like, you've still got to think about them and make sure that you're, engineering a solution that fits your specific requirements. And this is no different. So,
right. All right, gang. Well, Trisha didn't end up joining us, so Trisha, I hope your time at the dentist is a good time. And with that, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be on the podcast. Hope you found this useful, and have a nice day.